Thanks for joining for another episode of the TechSpective podcast. I have Adi with me from Automation Anywhere. So Adi, if you want to give a little bit of background on yourself.
Tony, thanks for having me. Adi Kuruganti, Chief AI and Development Officer at Automation Anywhere. Been with the company about 4 years. Before that, spent about 15 years at Salesforce. Really happy to be here.
Nice. This will be irrelevant to anyone because it depends on what day the podcast comes out. But for reference sake, today is a Thursday, and it's been a very challenging Thursday for me because I've had to remind myself like 3 or 4 times that it's Thursday. I keep my brain insists that it's Friday, and I have to keep reminding myself not quite.
And I know you're coming to California next week. We're in the middle of a heat wave, so I'm in the Bay Area, Silicon Valley. The heart of all things AI, but also we're having a crazy heat wave, 90 degrees, which is crazy in the middle of end of winter, so to speak.
That's I'm in Houston, and that's hotter than we're currently at in Houston.
Yeah.
Well, so let's talk about I guess let's start with give me a little bit of a background for anyone who doesn't know about what is Automation Anywhere? What do you do?
So Automation Anywhere, as I mentioned, it's based in the Bay Area, Silicon Valley. We're a late-stage venture-backed startup, pretty big for a startup, and from a size perspective. We created this category nearly I'd say maybe 12 years ago now, called Robotic Process Automation. And the goal essentially was, how do we enable customers to automate repetitive tasks so that they could have cost savings, FTE savings. And that grew like crazy. It was a kind of a market maker. And then over the last 5 years, we've kind of expanded to first intelligent automation, which is really looking at other automation tools beyond bots into things like document processing, process mining. And then now we've created this category called Agentic Process Automation, which is really about how do we enable our customers to automate the mission-critical processes by combining the best of deterministic processes with cognitive AI agents with centralized governance and observability. So that's the goal. That's kind of the core value prop there. We have over 5,000 customers, typically Fortune 1000, Fortune 2000, so pretty big enterprises. And over 400 million processes run in our system at any given time. And there's a lot of obviously tech around it, but we have strong partnerships as well with some of the hyperscalers as well as the model providers. And that's really helped us accelerate, especially over the last 3 years, into all things agentic AI.
Okay. Well, let me all right, here. But let me say first that so everything, almost every conversation I have these days is AI, and now it's all agentic AI. Yeah. And as we do in the security field with any buzzword, basically everyone starts using it regardless of whether they understand what it is or whether the thing that they're doing is actually that buzzword or not. And so there's a lot of hype around agents, but that rebranding, companies rebranding everything they do as agentic AI isn't necessarily accurate. And it gets at one of the things you already kind of alluded to, which is, and you and I have talked about this in the past, that we had, like robotic process automation, we have RPA, and that's more deterministic. That's like, just saying, hey, look, I have this set of steps. I'm going to have this thing do these steps.
It's rules-based, yeah.
As opposed to, agentic process automation, which is not deterministic, and it's so it's whatever. So like, I guess first, let's just start with that conversation about what are companies getting wrong about that shift in like branding everything as agentic AI.
So there's a lot of noise in the market, right? Like to your point, everybody's rebranding even their older products into some assistant, some co-pilot, some now co-work is a new thing. So you're going to see more and more of that, and that's just, I think, marketing departments being busy. Here's how I kind of laid out, right? or our lens to it. So when we talk about agentic process automation, we mean, which is essentially our enabling customers to automate mission critical processes. And mission critical means we're touching healthcare systems, financial systems. These are not like just creating a lead in Salesforce. These are actually touching customer PII data and processing things like, order management, prior authorization, anti-money laundering. So these are core processes that typically span multiple systems, both legacy and modern, different departments, lots of structured and unstructured data. So these are long-running complex processes. So when we talk about agentic process automation, it's about solving those or automating those use cases with human in the loop. And it typically involves combining deterministic or rules-based with cognitive AI agents. So it's not saying that an agent is just going to go figure it out and kind of be able to automate these processes, which is what you'll hear, some of the AI native startups, like the new startups out there, the 6,000 odd startups will say agents can just do everything. We understand that agents are probabilistic. They're never going to be 100%. And obviously, you can add things like context graphs and process graphs to make it to drive high accuracy. In the old days, things like RAG, but they're never going to be 100%. When you do an AML, there's certain things for compliance reasons have to be done in a certain way, have to be 100% accurate. For those, you'll still use a deterministic workflow, but there might be certain steps where you need to look at a set of documents, unstructured documents to make decisions. That's where you might use an agent. And so for us, it's a combination of the two, and that's essentially what our customers are doing. We have 1,500 customers who've deployed this in various use cases, and that's how they're doing it, right? It's not like just agents running amok. The second piece is the way I differentiate agents and what for me is important to be an agent. Agent is not an assistant. It's not yet another chatbot. I'm asking a question of a document. Because that is just an assistant, that's a co-pilot, great. An agent for me is, it can give it a goal, you can give it access to a set of tools. Frankly, now with some of the new tech, can create a tool, give it, through a skills.md and with the manifest. But the combination of understanding its goal and access to a certain set of tools, it can not only understand and plan what it needs to do based on the goal, but also can execute. So it can do the action piece of it. Most of the assistants out there are basically knowledge chatbots, right? And those are not agents for me, though many might be calling it agents. It has to be both knowledge and action combined, and it needs to be something where there's a goal around it and there's a probabilistic nature to it. It's not a rules-driven way of defining, okay, here's step one, here's step two. Sometimes step one and step two might be different.
Okay. Well, and I think one of the things that I think comes through for me whenever I talk to you and talk about automation anywhere is this basically the notion of like the right tool for the right job kind of thing.
Yes.
Because even within generative AI, like if I go look at ChatGPT or if I go look at Claude, Claude's got Opus and Sonnet, and ChatGPT's got 3.0 and 4.0 and 5.2 and whatever, and there's Claude Code and so just saying you're using Claude or just saying you're using ChatGPT that's very broad.
Yeah.
And if you're looking at it from the lens of trying to use tokens efficiently and not like overtax the system or basically use far too much power to answer a very simple question, you should be choosing the model that you're using based on what you're trying to accomplish. And I think the same thing then comes through here, which is some things are RPA, some things are APA, and being able to determine like, well, okay, which one makes sense for the context of what you're trying to accomplish. And like you pointed out, like, if you're dealing with healthcare, you're dealing with, finance. I mean, there's some things where it's like, no, I kind of want a precise answer. Like, I don't want you to just like vaguely guess it, whether or not the dosage on this medication should be, 5 milligrams or 50 milligrams.
And the answers can't change randomly. It has to be very exact. You can get sued for some of those when the answers are not exact.
But going back to how companies kind of brand things and jump on the buzzword bandwagon, everything becomes agentic AI. But the reality is like, okay, well, there are things where it's like that makes perfect sense. You should be doing that, but it's just it requires just a little bit more effort, a little bit more discernment to instead of just automatically applying, agentic AI, the agentic AI label to everything under the sun, just stopping to consider, okay, well, what is the outcome we're going for, which will help determine whether whether agentic AI would be an appropriate tool to achieve that outcome or not. And then, like I just said, even within that, even if you decide, okay, well, agentic AI is the tool, you still can go back and say, okay, but which model, like, how accurate do I need it to be?
Yeah, and we're constantly working with our customers on this. So we have, Ignite program, the various programs where we work on making a very customer, like we obviously we're a product company, we're not a services company. So we have all these product features and agent studios and governance features and all the other stuff. But to figure out what is the right tool for the right customer, you gotta understand the use case, what are the outcomes they're trying to drive, and then that's how we work very closely with them. In fact, for most of our customers, the first set of agentic processes that we deploy, which again, a combination of deterministic and cognitive, we deploy it with them so that they see the first set of results. And for a lot of our customers, this is new, right? Building agents is not something, and building agents at production quality is not something that everybody is familiar with. And then we also have tools like eval frameworks or evaluation frameworks where they can, for a given agent, they can test the output of that agent against different models so that they can pick the right model for the right outcome that they're trying to drive. So, for example, maybe for a healthcare outcome, they might use Gemini, or for another outcome, they might use Claude Opus, or they might use GPT-5, 5.2, whatever. They can decide, and that's the benefit of an open platform where we give them access to any model out there, and for some of our customers, even open source models that they need to be in air-gapped environments. So it's kind of that flexibility is really key for our customers.
Okay. Well, and yeah, so we've talked about how automation as a broader term should be focused on being outcome driven rather than tool driven, and that kind of helps determine like, okay, well, which is the right tool for the job. What does that, like as you're dealing with customers, like what does that look like for actual deployment, and how does that message resonate? Like, do you find that people struggle with the concept of saying, okay, well, everything's not agentic AI, we're going to use the right tool for the right job?
Actually, surprisingly enough, nobody pushes back on that. Everybody agrees that it needs to be outcome centric. I think there was a period of time when Gen AI and then agentic AI, because the timelines are so like in flux in terms of when was agentic AI versus Gen AI. But let's say 2 years ago is when kind of entire thing around agentic AI was really started to take off. I think customers, there was a period of time where it was kind of the FOMO thing. I need the tool, I need my co-pilot, I need, it's just like a tech check, because there's entire thing of AI is going to drive super productivity and you're going to be left behind if you don't use latest to greatest AI tools. And so there was a point in time where it was just buying technology for technology's sake. But at least in the last year and a half, as not only more tech has come, but the category is starting to not mature, but get to stage one, let's say in a 10-stage process. People are looking for outcomes because ultimately they have to show ROI to their to their exec teams, to their investors, right? You can't just kind of just being doing science experiments. So outcome-driven approaches are definitely, I think we're seeing that across our customers. I think the challenge though is saying which outcome is worth investing in. Because see, some of this is both art and science. You can't tell, okay, let's say you have an agentic process. There's certain things you know for sure because you can drive it from a rules-based process. But agents, again, models are changing all the time. A big part of the agent success is access to the data, but not only SOR or system of record data, but also context, like having the right context at the right time. You don't want to give it a big, rag context and hope it figures it out. So what we've also learned is you want to give it the right context, just the right amount of context at the right point, not give it kind of the entire knowledge base of the company, because that won't work either. So those things we're also learning and customers are learning. And so getting to what is the right outcome, making sure you can track that outcome and having those first wins is, I think, where most of our customers are focused on. And once you do that, then it's easier to go big. I think if you go big bang with everything, it becomes much harder.
Yeah. One of the, and well, actually, I guess first let me start with just asking your opinion on this.
Yeah.
I've talked with different vendors about agentic AI, and some have framed it as, well, you have to think of them as almost like a human employee. Like it's not like you're putting a printer on the network. Like it has access to things. You're giving it tasks. It has the ability to make a decision, and take action on that decision. And therefore it should be, from a like governance and accountability perspective, viewed basically as a human employee,
like a digital coworker, so to speak.
More or less, yes.
Yeah. In fact, there's some vendors who even have a avatar for these agents in their system. Yeah, I think so. I don't know if you would go as far as saying you need an avatar for every digital coworker, every agent, but definitely there's an aspect of identity for an agent, because even if it's performing actions on behalf of employee, doesn't mean you want to give it access to all that the employee has. And you also want to track from an audit standpoint what the agent is doing versus what the employee was doing on their own, right? And that's required in many highly regulated industries. So we are definitely seeing, and we've actually, our customers can do it, for example, with our platform, identity management, not only the traditional, IDPs and OAuth and other things, but also kind of having a different identity for the agent versus the employee is something that's pretty common for a lot of customers.
Okay. Well, and one of the things, so if I go back to like, say, just say RPA, like if I have a thing where there's like a defined set of steps and there's a defined set of rules and process, and I deploy that, or I execute that, and then it's very clearly just, like in terms of like, well, who's responsible? You say, well, Tony's responsible. Tony's the one who executed that process. Mm-hmm. That I think is something that's still like challenging or up for debate with some people when it comes to agentic AI. But I feel like you still have to apply sort of the same mentality to some extent. Like if I create an agent and deploy that agent, ultimately, I mean, the agent can't be responsible for itself. You can't fire the agent. So it's like whatever the agent does, on some level, the employee has to, like there has to be some responsibility tied back to a human at some point.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, ultimately, there's always the IT owner and a business owner for any process, and both of them are responsible for the success and the impact of those processes. Agent is kind of a means to an end, but you can't, like you said, you can't fire an agent. You can definitely track what the agent is doing, and you need to have that full visibility and auditability and observability around how agents are interacting with your systems and what are they doing, even what are they reading versus updating in these mission critical systems, healthcare systems, financial systems. But ultimately, it's always humans who are going to be responsible for the outcome and if things go wrong, they're ultimately responsible. And that's why when we work very closely with our customers to deploy these agentic processes, because we need the right level of guardrails, observability, central governance, so that they feel comfortable, and frankly, their compliance teams feel comfortable when they deploy it, and they have all the I's, all the T's crossed and all the I's dotted, so to speak.
Okay. One of the I think kind of more interesting things about AI is, like I was having a conversation like a week or two ago. We were talking about how, like, just saying I'm going to Google something or telling hey, have you Googled that, doesn't mean the same thing to every, like, because it comes down to like, well, how effective are you at querying and asking the question the right way? So your results will vary. Part of that though is like, like what you couldn't do with Google, but you can do with AI is, after you've done a prompt or two, you could be having this back and forth with ChatGPT or Claude or whatever. At some point, you can just stop and say, "Hey, is there a better way for me to have asked that question?" Or you can basically ask the AI to help you formulate the prompt better, and help you design an option. Basically, you can the thing you're using can help you use it better.
Yeah.
Which I think is an interesting construct, to basically be able to say, hey, is there a better way for me to do that? And one of the ways that I know for a fact that when I use AI tools that I use them poorly is because the tokens used are at least partially a function of how many words you're using in your prompt. Like, and I tend to prompt verbose.
Okay.
I tend to prompt the way I speak, and I so I write full sentences, and so where a 3-word command might suffice, I'm having a whole conversation as if I'm talking to you and asking you to help me with something, and I realize that's not the most efficient way, but I don't know, it works better for my brain.
Yeah, I mean, everybody's different. For me, it's all I'm like short sentences. But I think what I've learned is it's the interaction, like the conversation that actually makes it better. Where it's not a prompt and response. What I've found is you might do a prompt response, and then you might ask another question. So it's the back and forth where I have found that I get better results, whether it's Claude or ChatGPT, doesn't matter. And sometimes I question the response, um, and not in a negative way, but basically saying, okay, you said X, but what about this scenario where it may be counter to what the information you're giving, and actually that interaction sometimes makes the response better. So it's not so. I think more and more folks are doing. It's not only about prompt and response, but it's also that interaction and questioning and asking these different questions that actually helps get a far better output.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things, I mean, there's plenty of anecdotal stories about, generative AI giving results that don't, that aren't correct or that don't align with what the prompt was. And then people going, hey, yeah, that's not really what I asked for. And there's, ChatGPT going, oh, you're right. Sorry. My bad. Which, depending on what you're doing is either funny or horrifying, but what, and this comes back to like I guess like a sort of a data privacy concern or something, but like there are some people who are concerned or worried about like, well, how much stuff is being kept in the background on these platforms, like on a generative AI platform, how much information is being stored about me, and I look at that the same way I look at, how much my iPhone knows about me. Because to me, it's a continuum or whatever. Like it's a trade-off. Like you can choose to not share information, and lock things down and protect your data, but then you lose access to certain things. Like, you can turn off location data, but then you lose your GPS mapping, and you lose, so you lose functionality. When it comes to generative AI, the functionality to me is having that sort of accumulated memory. Like, I don't want to have to keep asking the same, pointing out the same thing. So I kind of want a ChatGPT or a Claude to remember our previous conversations, and so that I don't have to continuously say, hey, make sure you keep the Oxford commas in there.
Yeah, I think that's why using the enterprise version is better, or the paid version if you're a consumer. There are versions where that data will not be used to train. What I do though, like I think there's a little bit difference when personal usage versus in our world automation anyway for our customers. We're not using ChatGPT or Claude directly. We're using the models, right? Unlike LLM models. And there we might actually have customer data. The customer might have customer data, whether they're using it as part of agentic RAG or as part of a workflow process, where they're using some information to query to get the right response for the end customer. In those scenarios, though, things like masking of PII data is really important, right? Because last thing you want is to send, for example, patient information into an LLM, because even if they don't store it, that's not something that is the right thing to do, and there are regulatory issues around it. So there are tools around that, around governance of AI. Not only do you have things like observability and guardrails, but also what data gets sent, and when it gets sent, does it get masked, is also something that's really important, because most of the scenarios we live in for our customers are enterprise scenarios where you're dealing with customer data or financial data or healthcare data. So that data, you don't necessarily want unlike LLM to have access to that.
Okay.
But to your point, the memory, so as you're having these agentic interactions, the memory of what you've done previously, that's fine, because that is part of the memory context. We have this concept of short-term memory for a given chat session, or long-term memory where you come back, because many of our processes are long-running processes. That makes sense because you need to understand what happened so that the next action you take is contextual to what happened before.
Right. Well, and I've been saying for a few years that in my mind, the goal with AI, for me, is to eventually get to a level like Tony Stark's Iron Man, like Jasper in Iron Man, where it's like where it is almost well, I don't want to blow Marvel, blow the whole Marvel lineup for everyone, but eventually Jasper is sentient. But that's beside the point. But where it becomes almost like a sentient human being, personal assistant, and so like if I've already shared, how I like things to be done, or and I realize this is off topic from from what Automation Anywhere does specifically, but from like what AI can do for people on a personal level, like I'm okay. Well, it depends on the platform and the vendor, but like in theory, I'm okay sharing personal data, medical data, etc. with because I wanted to know. It can't give me good advice if it doesn't know those things. Now, I don't want that information shared elsewhere, but I want that level of interaction with the AI. I want it to know things about me, and I want it to remember it over time. I don't want to have to remind it, every single time I interact. I don't want to say, oh, by the way, here are my allergies. Don't whatever. It's like I want it to know those things off the top of its head.
Yeah, different folks have different appetite in terms of risk, but you should try OpenClaw. Maybe you put it on a different server and try that out. It can have access to all the information. It might share some of that information with other actors, but see, that's a use case. It's going to happen. We're in fact building something which where you could deploy those OpenClaw type techniques, but in a more restricted enterprise environment with governance and compliance, where it can access that enterprise data, again with the masking of PI data and everything else. So it has that context, but you do it in a governed way. I think what customers want is it's not as much the access to the data, because if you want an agent to work, it needs access to data. Otherwise, it's not going to actually work, because otherwise, how does it take action, right? How does it know the context? But it's just making sure that you have the way to govern what data gets shared, and when there's a need to mask certain data, you mask it, because you don't want that to be stored in these LLMs. And the second is that there's no leakage and there's observability of any actions that the agent takes based on that data. So as long as that's there, and there's certain governance structures around it, I think you'll find more and more customers getting comfortable, because seeing is believing, so to speak, right? So you want to see the fact that, okay, this agent took action on my health, based on my healthcare data, and scheduled an appointment with my doctor. You see that, and as you do it, at some point you get comfortable where it can just do it on its own at the right time. You don't need to review it or approve it every time, but you need to get to that comfort level.
Okay. If you had to, so bring this back on topic, like if you had to look ahead, I used to say 3 years, 5 years. Now I just say 18 months. If you had to look ahead, 18 months, like what do you think is the most important capability that still needs to mature before agentic process automation can become mainstream for mission critical environments?
Yeah. So I think agents are still evolving. It's just early. I mean, as much as we've been talking about agents for 2 years, first we talk about task specialized, now we talk about goal-based agents, and now we're talking about agents that can kind of create their own tools and run based on the goal, can go figure things out. I think it's still that technology is evolving to be production grade. Customers are deploying production, but it's really still the early use cases, right, in production. I think there's going to be huge effort around context. And context is not only about CI, like system of record data, it's about decisions and operational data. Namely, in the world of, for example, processes, how did a process execute? Because there's so many different paths it can take. Why did it take a certain path? And when an agent behaved in a certain way, what was the input that required input, as well as the data that it used that drove a certain output? So what is the history of that agent interaction? Because that context will then drive better agent behavior and outcomes going forward. So for us, there's a big focus on the process context, which is specific to every customer, so that the agent performance and the accuracy and reducing the hallucinations, that will drive those better outcomes. Then the governance around it, there's a lot of work we've already done, and along with our partners, around observability, audit, masking of PI data, knowing what's going in and out of an agent, what decision traces are happening. But there's a lot more that needs to be done there, including things like in highly regulated industries, a lot of the data is behind a firewall. So how do you make sure these agents can have access to that data at the right point of time, right? And that, so there are things that we're working on that as well. So I think the context and centralized governance are probably the big two areas that customers are looking for, because a lot of other technology is there and it will evolve, but those two are critical for these processes to have a higher accuracy and for customers to trust it before they deploy it at scale.
Okay. Yeah, when you mentioned hallucination just now, to me that goes back to the right tool for the right job thing, because there are definitely tasks that like are that are deterministic. Like, well, no, I need you to follow these exact steps, and I expect this exact result, and you can't deviate. But as we kind of move on to more creative endeavors or whatever, it's like, well, hallucination is a feature.
Yeah.
In the right context, hallucination is a feature. So it really just depends on, well, what's your goal? If you need an exact answer, maybe agentic AI is not for you. But if you've got room to kind of play around creatively with what the outcome is, then that might be a good choice.
Yeah, in fact, what some of our customers have been doing, especially since we rolled out our evaluation framework, they have a kind of cutoff where, let's say, the eval framework says this response based on the goal is about 80% accurate. They'll let it go, let it execute. In some cases, if it's lower than 80%, they might have a human for review. So I think there's always that option where you might say a human for review under certain accuracy, or where you think that it's below a certain bar, and hey, let the agent go and process, execute, if it's something above a certain accuracy level. But predominantly right now, we're still at the phase that most of our customers will always have human in the loop before the agent, executes completely. The agent will provide all the information, and then the human will approve, and then the agent will then execute. I think we're still at that trust mode where customers need to trust it before they'll just let it do it on its own.
True, but depending on the use case, you have to almost like sample test.
Yeah.
Like, because I was talking recently with a vendor, like more in like the AI SOC space, and saying, well, you have to use AI because the sheer volume of data, and telemetry that you're analyzing is more than a human can handle. That's the whole point of why you're using the AI in the first place. So then logically, it doesn't make any sense to say, okay, but you need a human to verify everything the AI does. It's like, well, if a human could verify everything the AI does, I wouldn't need the AI.
Yeah.
So it's like you have to decide, am I going to sample every 100th thing? Am I going to sample once a week? Like, how am I, what's my sample frequency going to be? And just kind of like periodically audit, just make sure that those periods are close enough together. And I think over time they get farther. Maybe initially you're sampling like, every few hours or at least once a day, and and if it keeps doing well, then at some point you say, maybe I can just check this once a week or whatever, and unless seems like things seem like they're going off the rails.
So you're right. That's what I mean by human loop. Essentially, it's more like a sampling to say, is that decision right? And as they get comfortable, it just, it moves on, like it does it on its own. And that's something built into our agents as well, where you can decide at what point that you want a human review or let the agent execute.
Okay.
But you're right. I think SOX is actually a pretty damn good example. We do that too, where we do some sampling, but there's just so many, billions of events, frankly. You can't really look at every event.
Right. I mean, it's just, it's like it's easy for me if I just am using it to, create an outline for an article or something like that. It's like, okay, well, I can personally review the output of that request and make a determination or whatever. But I guess that's more generative than that's not agentic anyway. But if I have AI agents working at my scale, I can actually check all the answers and make sure they're good. But yeah, I mean, the whole point of the AI SOC is that the volume is beyond what humans could keep up with.
Yeah.
All right. Well, it's all very interesting, and it's all moving so quickly. So it's like if I was to like go back over the last couple of years with these podcast episodes and just kind of see how the conversations evolved, it a lot has happened in a short period of time, and things move pretty quickly. So it would be interesting to come back and even 3-6 months from now and have this conversation again and see where we're at.
It's been we're in the fastest, you can call it innovation cycle or change cycle in my lifetime. I don't think it's ever been, and maybe because I'm in the Valley, in Silicon Valley, and there's a lot of hype out here, but just purely from a technologist, frankly, every other week there's something new. And part of it is figuring out what is relevant, because not everything is relevant, especially for our customers, or at least not relevant at that point. It might become relevant later, but not at that point. And so definitely we're all drinking from the fire hose, and we're constantly experimenting. I tell my team, rapid experimentation is the best art that we can build, because that's how we build these products. But it's also a fun time. I mean, what better time than to be doing this? I mean, imagine. I don't think there's been ever a funner time building products and technology for our customers. I think this is the best time, so to speak.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you for taking the time.
Yeah, thanks. Appreciate it, Tony.